So, Nael, let's take a few minutes to introduce yourself, your experience in this area, but more importantly, why should we, the audience, listen to you today?
That's a really good question, Nathan. So thank you for taking the time to come over and interview me. So today I'm going to start with the most important question first is why should you listen to what I have to say? So I'm a software developer by trade, and my career started quite early on driving digital change, implementing and deploying software to users. Right out of school. And one of the early on, I got a lot of confidence thinking, oh God, I must be amazing at this. So I went into a career of project management and things like that. And I basically, this is a little infographic in terms of which genre in which we were implementing change. But I was basically implementing change down here, like in little one owner businesses. I would say anyone that fits in here where there's multiple owner or one owner business. It's very easy to implement change because the owners wanted the change to happen. If there were multiple owners, they were very aligned. It was super simple. So I developed a high sense of confidence that I could implement change really well. And then I got into implementing into a slightly bigger organizations, but still very aligned. So, I went into doing enterprise departmental levels just for a brief bit until I had the rude awakening of government related change. So government change is the hardest type of change to implement. It's the most complex type of change to implement. And at the time, if you had asked me whether I did a great job implementing change, I would have said, yeah, I'm amazing at implementing it. I'm a project manager. But really, what I was doing as a project manager at the time is, of course, the definition of success is a project done. And, I'd install the light bulb in the right place and I have the switch installed in the right place and everything. And the light bulb works. So project is done. But most of the people who came into the room had no idea where the switch was or whether the light bulb was even installed. So that was, so the government change is the most complex place to implement change. And I learned that the hard way. Because when we did big go lives with large user groups and things like that, the cracks were there, but I just expected the cracks. I said, I'm just going to expect that a few people can't log in. I'm just going to expect that that's how change happens, and crawl before you walk and do a bunch of user training for hours and hours and expect people to remember all that information. Just old school type change management that I did back in the day that I look back on and go, oh my God, that was not a success. So in order to do change management really well, I had to do change management poorly, and then eventually recognize that I did it poorly after I attended the ProSci training. And now, with all the lessons learned from government and getting into also doing the lean training, I finally start to realize there is one huge contributor to doing change really, really well. And that contributor is embedded into our methodology. So this is our methodology. And we have 3 phases to change. So what I was typically doing over and over is the actualize phase. So I'd go in, I'd be like, what's the change? Let's make it happen. Let's get it done. I'd do the actualize phase. I do the process mapping, apply the technology, operationalize the adoption, but not even that way. I'd do it the old school way where I'd put people into training sessions for hours, or I just give them something to use and get it deployed because, hey, it's going to go viral and everybody's going to use it. But what was missing was the top piece, which is the connect phase. Is getting the people, the influencers who are responsible for driving the change, to clarify their vision, to align their changes and quantify why they need to do it, and then mobilize the change.
So let me just jump in. So a couple of questions on what you've been saying. So first of all, I find it interesting that the government would be the hardest to change. I'm just curious why. Is that because they change every few years, or is it just so many people involved?
Yeah,
Yep, go ahead.
Well, go. You have another question?
Yeah, so the connect phase is the main reason to get alignment on the senior level with amongst themselves, or with the senior level and levels below them. Who are you trying to get alignment with there?
That both great questions. So the reason government, so they're actually connected. So the connect phase that we deploy, it's for the leaders to know, first of all, amongst themselves, what the common vision is and what their behaviors need to be. So it establishes a clarity and common definition of project success in the leadership team to empower them to mobilize and change and engage their team. So this is what the connect phase is about, is they understand at the end of the connect phase, every leader knows the behaviors they're supposed to demonstrate specifically in terms of how to drive the change forward and why we're driving the change forward. The reason it is so hard in government is multifaceted. So the number one reason is government is quite politically driven. So the imagine if in a corporate environment your owner's team changed every 4 years. So you're right that the elections change every 4 years. And imagine if your budget was uncertain. So I've worked in government organizations where they don't know their current year's budget until October of the year they're in, and March is the end of the fiscal. It's a very, very stressful way to be. There's a lot of uncertainty even amongst the leadership teams. So getting them together, because this was one of my challenges, is I had to get agencies that had nothing to do with each other, and I had to drive policy level change. So for example, adult day programs, the government decided to centralize adult day programs, where an adult day program is where older adults get to go have a relax during the day while their caregivers are away. And so now they said, oh no, Bob can't just walk into your adult day program because he lives in the neighborhood. Bob has to apply to this centralized agency, and the centralized agency will do a wait listing and a criteria and then decide whether Bob gets to go to your adult day program. And that's the kind of change that I was responsible for implementing and facilitating. So obviously it'd be arrogant for me to say I was implementing it. I was facilitating that. I was responsible for finding the motivations of 17 adult day programs, and then to bringing them to the table, and my CEO at the time saying, what is your level of certainty that they're not going to balk at it, and I'd have to have a pretty high level of certainty. So I did it the hard way, where I worked on stakeholder engagement with every adult day program to bring it on. The digital adoption piece, long-term care homes, digitizing their paperwork from old paper-based forms. And, once again, I thought, wow, like, look at me. We did a great job. Like, our implementation is great. But then you go to some adult day programs and you see them using sticky notes. Like, so you have these electronic reports going to them electronically. The paperwork's going electronically. They print 45 pages, take sticky notes, and then put them on top of the adult day program. So really, at the end of the day, government change is where I cut my teeth, and I was forced to drive change there. And the clarifying vision and getting leadership connected was completely missing from when I first.
I was thinking, like, if you're dealing with the government, you might be dealing with the Minister of Mines or Natural Resources, and you're getting some traction, and then like 2 weeks later, there could be a change of government, or this person could be the Minister of Fisheries, and then you have to start all over again. I guess that could happen in mining, where there's a change of CEO, but it seems like it's less certain when you're dealing with government people from day to day.
Oh, yeah. And I think the biggest uncertainty, Nathan, is not even just government changing, but because government is highly driven by people's perceptions. So my favorite and least favorite group of people that I have a lot of empathy for is people who work for cities. So we have, any city has these human representatives of different wards. And a ward member could show up at a meeting and just make a comment like, oh, my road wasn't paved. When was the last time my road was paved? Like just something simple like that. And then the poor infrastructure services is in a tizzy trying to figure out, oh my God, let me go get that data and let me go get the report and all that kind of stuff. They don't have the ability to do their jobs normally. Like it is a pretty chaotic working in government is extremely chaotic because it's just perception based. Minister of Mines could just make an ad hoc comment and not even mean anything by it. But then there's a whole bunch of work that happens in the background to try and make sure that we satisfied that need. So any industry where there's a high degree of perception, like where perception has a huge value. So government, there's a huge value in perception. And that is really why it was so difficult to make change. But here's the thing, Nathan, that I learned. So I just thought of it. Because I understood that government was highly perception driven, I was successfully able to leverage the said perception of various agencies later in my career when I first started PayStock Global to define and create proposals and get projects funded. Because what makes something not work also makes something work. So because government is really highly motivated by perception, I learned the strategy of connecting initiatives to what their said strategies were. And so that is how you actually get them to make changes, the fear of perception, of being perceived poorly. And that is why it's the worst kind of place to do proper change management in. But also, if you know how to leverage it, you can do it really well.
So I think we bashed government enough. So let me ask you another question. I've heard you use the phrase, and I think you used the word certainty a few minutes ago. So
Yes.
I've heard you in your talks talk about activate certainty. Well, what does that mean to you?
So activate certainty basically means that we make sure that shit gets done. so at the end of the day, activating certainty is if somebody has an idea of what they want implemented, or say you implement a piece of software, the easiest way to say it is we make sure that the goals are what we're going to realistically achieve. So when we go to do software implementation, say at a mine site, for example, we define what an adoption rate is going to be. We don't guarantee 100% adoption all the time. We basically activate certainty on the assessment. So we have the ability to professionally assess and give you a clear idea of what level of adoption you can expect. And then we drive to achieve that level of adoption or better. But at the beginning, like at the clarify vision stages, right? So when we talk about the connect phase, Nathan, part of each little software implementation when we're going through the connect phase is we're actually going in and we're understanding what's going to drive the change or not drive the change. And so we activate certainty by connecting leadership to a clear definition of success and then driving towards that definition of success.
So I suppose you're going to tell me it's more than just tell people to change or to do something differently.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more than that, just because that's what everybody else who's hired us has done. So now our most perfect clients are clients who are in this sweet spot here. So mostly it's enterprise level change that people who bring us in to drive the change. And the reason the connect phase is so important is, so you see here when we talk about small organizations, you could have a small organization of multiple owners, but they're not aligned. So small organizations typically are very easy to implement change in. Under 1,000 people organization, if you have one owner or a line set of owners or board, like a nonprofit, you can implement change fairly easily. But if you have the tiniest organization, but the owners or the leadership team is not aligned, it's a very high difficulty of implementing change. So
no, I agree. I've worked for organizations where the senior leadership couldn't agree on what day of the week it is, and let alone, some of these KPIs that are driving the company.
Absolutely. for sure. And
So if you're trying to implement a change, for example, change from a safety form or a circle check or a light up from pieces of paper, which typically most miners are doing, to something digital, the chances are the iPhone or the tablet are going to work. That's not going to be the issue. It's
yeah.
getting the people to adopt and to want to make the change. So what's the approach? To show them what's in it for me, to show them how easy it is to make the change. What do we have to prove to them to get them to change?
Yeah, it's a great question, Nathan. So we typically specialize in implementing change in hierarchical organizations. So in hierarchical organizations, what typically happens, the reason we do a connect phase in a hierarchical organization is we are going in to assess how aligned the leadership is. Can they agree on what day of the week it is and what the measures are to implement change, right? And we go in, so our connect phase is to assess if the readiness of the leadership at the site to be able to drive the change forward. So, back in the day, I would have said, yeah, I say what's in it for you. And I do like, those are very basic change management things. Like at our level, of course, that needs to be there. But at the end of the day, in a hierarchical organization, what's in it for them is following through on specific direction that leadership has set. So that's you can say it's what's in it for them, but I don't have to tell them what's in it for them. We are not the face of the change. Their leaders are the face of the change. So that's what we do differently, is when we go into organizations, we're simply facilitators. So we're not there grandstanding, trying to teach them this, that, or the other thing. We're there wiring the communication into the various site meetings already, making sure that the right leaders are in the right spots, making the right communication to get the right change to make the right results. So whether it's a circle check or anything else, the first thing we do start with is using the data properly at the leadership team level. And using the data properly is just starting with sample data to show leadership what's possible. So that is what the connect phase does.
So that sounds like a big differentiator. So it sounds like you're not trying to bring in dozens and dozens of people and stay there for years at a time. It sounds like you're trying to, make a specific change, come in, come out.
Absolutely. So, and that is a huge differentiator, Nathan, because what our methodology consists of: connect, which is getting the leadership aligned to make sure that we activate certainty that guarantee that the change will happen. The actualize phase, which is actually showing them how to make the change. But the biggest differentiator is transform. Transform is about driving sustainability and creating a culture of implementing technology change at site. The question I always like to ask organizations is, do you think that you're ever going to stop implementing technology? Like, when do you think you're going to have the right technology done? What point, right? It's like there isn't a point, because innovation is like, technology is evolving so rapidly. You need the ability, you need the right governance structures in your organization. You need the people in your organization to actually know how to drive the change. So in a lineup meeting, there's a lot of efficiency created by using lineup tools and things like that. But instead of giving the time back to try and get more ore out of the ground, what we do is we repurpose the time to get them to drive digital adoption change in 5 minutes a day, to learn one new skill every shift cycle. So people are just starting to expect that new changes are happening. So a lot of the feedback we get from sites is that, we've created this sense of momentum of them feeling that they can continue with the change. So oftentimes we don't stay at sites for a very long period of time, because we're just going in to coach and show them how they can implement change and drive that sustainability and then mobilize out.
And that whole philosophy leads into continuous improvement. If you're making 5-minute changes every day, but over months and years and so forth, those add up to a lot, as opposed to like a big step change.
100%. And that's really where we got the idea from, Nathan. It's not an original idea. So we got it from continuous improvement, because all of our a lot of our team members, a high percentage of them, are all Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belts. So we're a whole organization of operational excellence individuals, consultants that basically are there to make rapid, quick improvements. And the differentiating factor for us is we leverage technology a lot quicker than the average operational excellence consultant.
Going back to the question about the size of the organization. So if it's a really, really big organization, which I think of as the government, but of course it could be mining, do you break it down into like a division or even a department within a division? Because it would be really difficult to make, a global change if they're, dealing in multiple countries. So how do you look at that question?
That's a brilliant point. So we've had to drive change across, start the initiation of change across 10 countries for one organization's 21 different sites, 3 different languages and 5 different time zones. And so when it comes to that level of change, it starts the same way, but in many different connect layers. So when you typically think of our methodology and you think of the connect, actualize, transform in one simple way, right? Where you think of it like, oh, it's just like the leadership and then the mid to mid application layer and then sustaining it at a site level. What happens that's different is the connect phase happens over and over and over again at multiple different layers to create the motivation. So we actually have the ability to get people together, and that case study I just finished telling you about, 10 different countries, 5 different time zones, 3 different languages, 25 different sites, all getting together to build a common vision of what that change looks like at the onset. So that's just at the very highest level to get the motivation going. So you're encouraging sites to see the art of the possible. And then you look for some early adopters who are raising their hands. In this case, we identified about $100 million of improvement opportunities. And we had hand raisers, and we went to those sites to start the implementation, to start the change. So we had some early adopters demonstrating early quick wins, and then sharing their success with other sites and coaching other sites to help drive the change. So that is how we drive massive, big change, is by simplifying it. Because at the end of the day, the thing that I need, so yesterday I went to a really interesting client call. And this is a very challenging, complex organization to deploy change within. And they said, well, you should be a little bit more overwhelmed because this is sort of semi-governmental organization. And they said, well, we're very different. It's very complex, and they're right. Like their management structure is very matrix, very surprising. And all we need is to know what the desired behaviors are. We need to know what are the current behaviors we need to change. What are the desired behaviors? If you don't know what the desired behaviors are going to be in the change, it's very difficult to implement the change, in any context. So go ahead.
Yep, I'm thinking some of the factors that would contribute to the complexity of change, like, for example, competing priorities within a company, the corporate governance, historical baggage, and so forth. Like you must have your own as well. Like, are there certain ones that you think of if I ask that question?
Yeah, for sure. The biggest complexity in the deployment of change is, it'll sound very basic when I say it, but it's just simple lack of alignment or competing priorities. That's what it is. So even if it's in a small organization, if you have multiple partners who have competing priorities or they're not aligned on something, that creates an insane amount of complexity in driving change. So that's the number one thing. In mining organizations, the reason driving change within a mining operation is challenging is because their role is to get either more ore out of the ground faster, float more ore, mill more ore. So whatever type of organization you are in mining, that they have a primary job. The job is to just get more value out of the raw material presented to them. Their job is not to implement new technology. So they have no governance structures in place to actually drive the implementation of technology or drive the implementation of change. So that's what we're doing for those organizations, is we're going in and establishing governance structures. I was just at a site yesterday that we implemented a management operating system at, and I love the feeling of the site. That's sort of any new way of them trying to manage the site that they want to manage. They actually have a governance structure in place. They have a weekly, set of routines that helps them drive that through. So that site is a really great example of where you implement transform, right? And you simplify the complexity of it. But really, in terms of complexity, the lack of governance structures to make the change, the lack of alignment within the owner's team, the leadership team, is the highest, most complicated factors. The historical, when we talk about historical baggage is also pretty present, because people say, back in the day we used to do this, and back in the day, like in the good old days, this is what happened, and we didn't have to do X, Y, or Z. We have people resisting logging into a system because they're used to getting a piece of paper in front of their faces, right? So it's the back in the day mentality. But I think the single biggest thing that is not obvious to individuals, that is very that you could think that you're in a hierarchical organization driving change, is when the leadership structure is not as expected. So if you're typically expecting a organization to have a one boss and one person to make the decision, and that's typically what an organization has, but suddenly for some reason now they have a group at the helm, it's extremely jarring for the people looking for that decision making. So, or sometimes if you expect a command and control leader, and the site's been command and control the whole time, and suddenly you get some person coming in and trying to do kumbaya and saying, I want everybody's opinions and give me your feedback and things like that. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but really, like, if the site has expected command and control, right? And you're not giving them command and control, suddenly you've changed the leadership style. It's jarring. You can't implement change because the expectation, suddenly you have to train 100% of your staff to expect different kind of management. Not saying it's going to be bad, but it's going to be really, really slow to change, and it's going to be very jarring.
That made me think of two questions. I'll
Go for it.
I'll put them in order. So the first one, you'll have to follow me for a minute or two. So in some companies I've worked with, it was like very strong corporate presence. Like Toronto held the budget. Toronto told people what to do. Everybody had the same IT system, the same accounting system, and so forth. Others, it's more local, where the local plant would have the budget and the people and so forth. So, you must see differences between those two approaches.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll tell you my observation of differences between those two approaches, because one is not better than the other, believe it or not. It goes back to what we're talking about, complexity of change. So we've been to sites where it's a site that's isolated in the middle of nowhere, and they couldn't give whatever for whose name is on the door, right? So their sites are being traded, between companies, like, oh yeah, this mine site's now this badge, this mine site's now this badge. So those sites, if you have a site like that, that's sort of like, hey, we're local, we're here, we're running this operation, right? If you try to drive corporate change, if you try to decide and suddenly change, oh, your standards are different, now you're part of our logo, so this is what's different, you're not going to get a huge amount of traction necessarily. You're going to get a bit more resistance from that site. So there's that happens. But it also depends on other dynamics. So if this site is isolated in a remote place where there are no other jobs, there are no other options for these individuals to go work at, right? The resistance level is lower because they know that this is their only source of employment, right? So it's really contextual to where everything is at, right? But what happens when decisions are made from a corporate perspective, because I have a preference of what type of organizations I like to work with. I don't know if I should say that on over here, but when decisions are made from a corporate perspective, right? What happens is corporate has no idea what is actually happening at site. So they may lay out a roadmap and it's literally making a PowerPoint presentation as far as corporate is concerned, and but they have no idea what's happening at site. They have no context on how they're going to bake in the improvements, how they're going to get a higher rate of productivity or anything. They have these theories sitting in a corporate office. They need to be at site. So I guess my bias is given away. I like to work with organizations where the site drives a lot of the decision making. Because
I've seen both sides of that. So for example, you go to the corporate office, you convince the CEO, hey, here's a new shiny object, and okay, I
yeah,
want that. Go to all my sites and implement it. And then you show up on site, they don't know why you're there or who sent you. Versus you go to the site and it's like it could be a 6-year-old mine manager who hasn't added original thought in 60 years, and it's like, oh, I don't understand what you're trying to do. So I guess it's finding the right person in the organization that understands what you're trying to do, has the power to get the sites to implement them. So like you said, there's no right or wrong. It's whatever works within that organization.
For sure. And if you bake in, having to, so I find like one of the organizations we work with, they do it really well, where they actually bake in those corporate mandated priorities into people's performance plans. So when the mine manager or the mill manager has the corporate expectation baked into their plan, so the corporate has defined what needs to be done, site defines how it gets done. So I think that's that level of autonomy and control, because you have to give sites some level of autonomy and control in terms of what you're looking to deploy. But from a enterprise standard, a software standards perspective, there absolutely must be some thou shalls in terms of the use of technology, because you don't want to be having a best of breed situation amongst your sites if you don't have a really good way to do data valorization and unlocking that data into a standard set of reports that will give you an idea of how each site is performing apples to apples.
I promised you that I had 2 questions. So my second question is more cultural. So in Canada, if you had a group of workers, everybody wants a chance to express their opinion and to have like a brainstorming session. But I've also worked at mines in Mexico where that's not the culture. They'll always defer to the most senior person in the room.
Yeah.
So brainstorming sessions don't typically work because they'll just look around and say, oh, you're the most senior person. What do you think? So
Yeah.
I would imagine, making change in those 2 environments would be quite different.
Absolutely. It goes back to that original point I made, is what are the people expecting? So when people expect a certain type of management and a certain type of leadership, you cannot just go in there and then give them a completely different kind of leadership, whether you think that's better or not. So whether you think asking questions and getting a brainstorming session going, oh, it's so much better if we do it that way. Well, if that's not what they're expecting, it's not useful to getting the results. So it really, culture is not right. Culture is not wrong. Culture is just as is. Like Disney actually has one of the most controlling cultures in the world, but they have a very effective culture. And so culture is unique to every site, unique to every organization. And a topic for another webinar is there is actually a way to measure culture and the satisfaction with the status quo that helps us understand, as part of our Connect phase, whether a change will stick or whether a change will take a longer time to implement. that kind of stuff. I don't know how much time we have, but it's really interesting to diagnose a site's culture or a company's culture, and you can very easily see if a change is going to be implemented or not going to be implemented, depending on the site's culture.
I was thinking of a Venn diagram scenario. So, for example, I was at a place where there were the local workers, then there were
Yeah.
the expats that came from, let's say, Canada. And then there was a third class where they brought in people from, let's say, Indonesia or from Philippines. So there was like 3 levels. So what's the real culture there? Like the local culture is different than the one in Canada. The one in the middle is different again. So, is there a blended culture? So it would be interesting for you to do a diagnostic on a one that's just not a totally Mexican mine or a Canadian mine, where there's these other dynamics going on.
Oh, for sure. Because culture really has nothing to do with people's nationalities. It has everything to do with people's perceptions of reality. And that's why it's so complex. So when we do a cultural diagnostic, Nathan, we have a set of 30 questions divided into groups of 5, 6 groups of 5. And we basically ask people those series of questions in terms of where they think the organization is today and where they want the organization to be tomorrow. And that develops a spider chart of sorts. And then you can see how satisfied people are with the status quo, or how unsatisfied people are with the status quo. So a cultural assessment is this cultural assessment can be delivered over 60 different countries, and get you accurate results in terms of, because so we've done diagnostics, for example, and seen administration. So we do it by different layers and different groups. That makes sense. So we did a cultural assessment for a First Nations organization, and we did a diagnostic of the administration layer, and then we did a diagnostic of the frontline delivery, the people who are actually delivering the services layer. And when you see the cultural assessment of the administration layer, it's very different. And it's basically saying they're very happy with the status quo. They don't want anything to change. When you see the cultural assessment of the service delivery layer, they are very unhappy with the status quo, and they want things to change. And then they tell you in the assessment, you're able to see in which direction they wanted things to change. So in their case, they wanted more autonomy over how they delivered the services, and maybe more control over the budgets with the services they were delivering to do it that way. Sometimes we've seen mine sites where we've done cultural assessments at, and let's say project sites. So many years ago, we did a couple of project site cultural assessments, and where there was, when you talk about expectation versus reality. So in certain sites where there were multiple contractors, cultural assessments said they wanted more direction. They wanted more clear, specific direction. They wanted more command and control from site, so they knew they knew their expectations. Versus, someone that maybe people that are leading the site saying, "Oh, we're just expecting you to do the best you can because you guys are amazing. We hired you for a reason," right? So that's the difference in cultural assessments. Cultural assessment has nothing to do with your ethnicity, your background, your knowledge. It has everything to do with your current state perception of reality of work versus your future state expectation of reality of work. And that literally is a numerical way of defining how you're going to implement change into the future.
Well, even there, those are 2 different scenarios. Let's say you have both of them being mine sites, but if it's a producing mine where they do X thousand tons per day versus a project site where every day it's in a state of flux, something's changing because there's a new milestone. So both of them are mine sites, but the change in those 2 scenarios could be quite different.
Absolutely. It's if you go into an operating site and people are complaining about something that, like, in terms of safety, like when they complain about like not knowing exactly where to go, that's problematic. Like, you don't even have to do a cultural assessment to understand it. So if they were saying we need more command and control and it's an operating mine, like just doing the cultural assessment without looking at the safety stats, I know safety is shit. Like, it's just very easy for us to close our eyes, do the cultural assessment. I don't even have to know where it is. I can tell you a lot about the site without knowing which site or any more data relates to the site.
So let's go back to digital adoption. In your opinion, what are some of the biggest complexities? I know alignment, of the people and the senior people is one of them, but what other complexities would you can you think about when it comes to those adoptions?
Yeah, I think that the complexity of digital adoption is really around something that I can simplify very easily. And it is not knowing the impact of the data that you're putting in, not knowing how to make the right decisions with the right data. So when we talk about digital transformation at Pace, Nathan, our definition of digital transformation is making sooner, safer, better decisions with your data. And if a site is challenged to implement technology implement technology within their mindset, it's because they have a theory of what they want, and leadership doesn't know what will actually change for them. So the biggest complexity around digital adoption is not having very clear business cases around why, in the broader context of making the change, why the change needs to happen. So I've attended some of your webinars, Nathan, and I've heard you criticize mining being very slow to change, right? And I always say, no, it's not that mining is slow to change. It's that everybody else that's trying to implement the change, that's trying to implement a technology, is not good at communicating the value of the implementation. And so the biggest complexity for implementing digital technology is not the technology itself. It's really nothing to do with the technology itself. It has everything to do with people's understanding of the value that's going to be coming to site as a result of the implementation of technology, and people's disbelief in actually realizing the value. There's a very valid reason to not believe that you will get the value out of the technology, because most often than not, when the technology does hit your site, you do a really poor job of digital adoption. And when you do a poor job of digital adoption, you're not going to get the value at your site. So the best answer to make digital adoption simple is to get your site to this third stage, which is transform. If you get your site to transform, if you get your site to learn how to make technology change in 5 minutes a day, and you start building this repertoire over the next year, over the past 2 years of slowly but surely making that measurable change and measurable improvement related to technology, that is the best way for you to uncomplicate implementing digital technology at your site. So that is why we do the work we do.
No, I could see that, like in the Six Sigma context, in the MAEC forum, it's usually the control, in your case, the sustain, that's the hardest. Like people will try something, it could stick for a few days or weeks or for as long as you're on site. But, what will get them to sustain the change going forward is always the hard part of it. And I think you're saying the same thing.
Absolutely, Nathan. I think that's, at the end of the day, that is the hardest part. I actually have a course around a short course. So we have a course coming up. You're joining me for that course. It's CIM, around getting that motivation, that intention going around, how do you do digital adoption? And we're actually creating a course just for mining companies around creating more digital adoption specialists at mine sites, because that's what's needed. We need to create sustainability for mine sites to be able to implement digital change on a consistent basis so they can see better value and guarantee the value for the technologies that they're implementing.
Yeah, there'll be some people who are looking at this after the fact. So if you are joining us afterwards, this is going to be the CIM Connect event in the Vancouver in May. So Neha's got a short course on the Sunday before the conference starts. So if you're registering for the conference, check out the short course as well. So
Yeah.
we're running out of time, but I just have one or two more questions, if
Yeah,
you
for
don't
sure.
mind. Okay. So at some mine sites, there's a change leadership group or some, part of the organization. So how does that help you? What is its significance in implementing change, and how do they work with you as a company?
That's a really good point, Nathan. So most mine sites, the change leadership group is informal. It doesn't really exist. There are a few motivated individuals who want to implement change. So what we do when we go to a mine site is we actually formalize this group. So we create a group called the change leadership group. So what I have finally realized in my later ages. So I don't want to say in my old age because all of my colleagues don't like that. But but what
Especially
I
me.
finally what I finally realized in 20 years of work is that um, the the single biggest contributor to driving change is having an excellent governance structure at a particular site or in a particular organization whose job is to drive change. So a change leadership group is a group that we put together whose purpose, whose job it is to drive change throughout the organization. That's part of the sustainability that we install for you. So when we are leaving a mine site, you actually have a group that's established whose job is simply to make sure that change is being implemented across a mine site. Did I miss any part of your question?
No, no, that's great. So you've told us why we should listen to you, and you've told us why people should hire Pace. So if you go back 20 years to when you were like 15, what what have you learned? What changes have you made that have, shaped your vision of the whole change management journey?
I think my sense of arrogance in as a project manager has definitely diminished. So the biggest thing that I have learned is I was never as great of a project manager as I thought I was because I never, people really like I said, the light bulb was there, the switches were installed, but people still stayed in the dark because they had no idea that there was a change in lighting. They brought their candles in and used their candles anyway. So the biggest thing I learned specifically is the single biggest contributor to driving change is leadership. And if your leadership is aligned and your leadership will actually give you clear direction, especially in hierarchical organizations, that goes miles head and shoulder above everything else to drive change. And specifically with digital change, the actual software features are not that important. The features of your software are not that important. Right now, you can, you can build a lot of software. The most important thing right now is how can you unlock that data and how can you get people making the right decisions with the data that's in the systems. That is the single biggest differentiator in driving digital change. And that's the biggest thing I've learned over my years. And I learned that when I was a database analyst. That's my background, software and a database analyst. And I wrote a lot of reports. But getting people to change their behavior, change the tactics within the organization by leveraging data is the easiest thing you can do to create a sustainable culture over the long term. Like a culture of continuous improvement, you can continuously improve your processes if you're looking at the data and making constant adjustments and decisions as new data comes through.
Yeah, that would be a separate discussion. Do you have
Yeah,
any
for sure.
data coming through? So, hey, Naya, how many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb?
That's that's a great question, Nathan. I think one,
Just one.
one,
But
just
you're right.
one.
But the light bulb must really, really, really want to change. That's the
That's a good one. I wasn't expecting that one.
well, it just shows we're not planned here. So,
No, we didn't plan very well.
so I'll just leave you the last few minutes. If there's anything that I didn't ask you that you want to cover, or anything you want to leave the audience with.
Yeah, I think that when people watch this recording a little bit later, we do have a course called 3 Steps to Digital Adoption. It's a free course that we give away on our social media channels. So definitely sign up for that course to learn a little bit more about some pitfalls, typical pitfalls to avoid when you're implementing digital change. And the typical pitfalls to avoid is, you think that the technology is going to be the answer to your solutions. You think that the vendor training is going to be enough to make the actual change happen. And, the other one is, you over engineer the change at the end of the day sometimes. So there are some typical pitfalls to avoid when you're implementing change. So take a look at our course, because we have that free course. If you are a MindSite looking to implement change, definitely come to our online course. It's very live. It's very interactive. It's with people and we're actually going to give you a case study and take you on some tours of MindSites that we are partnering with in terms of creating an incubator program for digital adoption specialists. So looking forward to that next stage of our company, and and very exciting news to come for our company into the very near future.
So Neha Singh, the CEO of Paystock Global, thank you for your time. I enjoyed our discussion today.
Thank you, Nathan Stabina. As always, you're